Okay, the September meeting of Parks and Recreation Advisory Board will come to order. We can start with the Pledge of Allegiance, please.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, if we can have the roll call, please.
Yes. Mr. Morrow?
Here.
Ms. Drumheller?
Present.
Mr. Renzi?
Present.
Mr. Halloran?
Present.
Ms. White?
Present.
Ms. Webster?
Here.
Thank you.
Or present. Okay, do we have any announcements or agenda modifications?
Hello. Ooh.
Any announcements or agenda modifications? Okay, hearing none, we'll move on to the approval of minutes. Did everyone have an opportunity to read the minutes? I do have one change in the roll call. Our alternate, Mr. Abraho, was unexcused last meeting. He was not here.
Okay.
Does anyone have any other agenda modifications? Can I have a motion?
I will make a motion to accept the, to approve the minutes from last meeting as amended.
Second?
Second.
We have a second from Mr. Morrow. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, the motion carries. Now we'll go to public input. This is the time for anyone from the public to discuss anything that is not currently on our agenda. Do we have anyone that has anything to say? Is it something that's on the agenda, ma'am? Okay, so why don't you come, this would be the time for you to come up and ask your questions. If you could, please, when you come up, if you could give your name and address for the record, that would be wonderful.
Okay, my name's Ardith Hale. I live at 756 Newhall Terrace.
Could you spell your name for me, please?
Ardith, and Hale is Hale.
Thank you.
Okay. I wanted to ask about the pool, but the pool probably belongs to the county's purview. Is that correct? Okay. And I wanted to ask if y'all have any knowledge of any recreational developments scheduled for any of the undeveloped land in Sebastian?
What type? What do you think?
Well, they have cleared a couple lots and put in playgrounds. They also did some drainage work by clearing lots. I was just wondering if y'all had any knowledge of any of those.
Well, do you have a specific piece of property that you are talking about?
There's 3 city lots across the street from me, and right now they're undeveloped, which is good. But the nearby on Tulip, there used to be also a long stretch, and that's been changed into a drainage area with a fenced-in pond.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Blankenship, is that something that you can manage for us?
All that I can speak on is that presently there are no plans for any type of park amenities in that area.
Okay.
No new facilities. I don't know about stormwater, but for parks, there's no plan.
Okay.
And you can keep following. Usually if something like that's going to happen, it'll come up to us and we'll be discussing it for quite a while instead of just popping it out that, yes, we're putting a park there. So it usually takes a while to start a new park. And you can always check our agendas for our meetings to see if anything is coming up on that.
Okay, and they'd be on the website?
It would be on the website.
Okay. The other thing I had, several years ago, I was at a meeting and there was a discussion on making a new community center for Sebastian. Has anything rolled out for that?
There's nothing currently being discussed about a new community center presently.
Okay. All right. That's all. Just got questions.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank
Thank
you.
you for coming. Are there any public input on Zoom?
Not at this time.
Paul?
Good evening, Board.
Good evening.
Paul Halloran. Okay. At last month's meeting, I asked about a time capsule, if the committee knew about a time capsule. And Madam Chair, you mentioned that I should contact the Centennial Committee, and I did, and they wrote back and they said, Mr. Halloran, we actually have 2 time capsules. One with Vero Beach, placed in 1976, and will be opened in 100 years. 2076. The other one is in Riverview Park, with no mention of when it will be opened. Riverview Park placed in 2004, so it's been there 20 years, but no mention of when it will be opened.
Did they tell you where it was in Riverview Park?
No, and I'm sorry I didn't go, but at the next meeting, I will know.
Well, very interesting, because I walk in that area all the time, and you would think it would be marked or in some, place of significance.
I'm
But
wondering,
if you mark it, somebody might dig it
Yeah.
up. I wouldn't mark it.
no, I wouldn't either, but I'm wondering why 2004? Was there a big addition or anything put onto the park, or?
Hurricanes Jean and Francis.
Yeah, we have the 3 hurricane map there, right?
That would be interesting to find out
Okay.
why in 2004.
Okay, so now you
look
have
into it.
another assignment, Paul.
Very good,
We
thank
love to
you.
hear it. Thank you so much for investigating that. Okay, moving to unfinished business. Item A, our current project update. Mr. Blankenship?
Good evening, Advisory Board. Just to keep you guys in the loop, Riverview Park planning continues. We should be coming back to you shortly with some conceptual plans. Bryant Court Playground, if you recall at the last meeting, we brought a grant opportunity to you for Bryant Court Playground, but that has, the situation there has changed as far as funding goes. So tonight, later on in the agenda is approval of a FERDAP application for Friendship Park Playground. Bryant Court is still getting a playground, it's just going to be funded differently. We finally got the design for the backstops back, so they're being reviewed now, and they'll go out on the street shortly. We have a short window, a very tight window to get this done, because we want to get it done before spring ball, but they're in the middle of fall ball now, so we've got about part of November, some December, and some of January that we can do this. The special event policy discussion went to council at the last meeting, and really what was decided was just to up the fees for-profit events. Up the fees and then add some more responsibilities, since it is for-profit, for overtime staffing, for waste management, for that type of stuff. So that all will be codified here shortly and become part of our policy.
Well, Mr. Blankenship, when that is all put together, can the committee members get a copy of that policy, please?
And
Because
it'll
there's
be
been a lot of discussion and a lot of back and forth about fees and how it's going to impact. I'd like to see it.
Mm-hmm. Now, just keep in mind, it'll be 2 readings, because it's an ordinance amendment. So the plan is to come October 16th with the first reading, and then back, because we only have 1 meeting in October, 1 meeting in November of the council. So, but I'll email it to you once it's drafted.
Okay, great, thank you.
And then the Born Learning Trail work day is October 26th, coming up in a few weeks. Is that when they're installing it? Yes.
Is that something that they want volunteer help?
Yes, I think FP&L is providing, it's either FP&L or Publix are providing the bulk of the volunteers, but it is open to the public, and I'll send you guys more information. I emailed them today to get,
But
final
that's
plans.
not, is that the same day that there's like an opening of that?
It's,
No. Yes, no?
yeah, it's planted, I mean, it's constructed and opened the same day.
Okay, so when you get more information, since we don't have a meeting in October, can you make sure that
I'll
we get
email
that
it to
out?
you.
Thank you.
Yeah. That's all
I'm
I
not
have.
really good with a heavy shovel or heavy equipment.
Well, there's other things. That's all I have for that.
Does anybody have any questions about those projects?
I have a question on unfinished business. Still waiting on the dollar figure for the impact fees.
Are you looking for how much we charge for impact fees or how much we've collected?
No, how much you actually charge
Okay,
per property.
and that's my misunderstanding. I thought you were, that's why I sent the budget out. So I'll have to get that number and email you guys what our per thousand rate is for recreation impact fee.
Great, thank you.
I think when I mailed Mr. Blankenship about that before this meeting, he sent out the budget again with the impact fee information, but I said, I think what we want to know is, we see all this new building, but we're not seeing a whole bunch of money going into our fund. And so on top of what our fee is, I'd actually like to know when it gets paid. Does it get paid at the end of construction? Does it get paid at the CO? Does it get paid when it's sold? How does that money come into the city? Just because it looks like we should have more, doesn't it? So we're not really savvy about that situation, but we'd like to know a little bit more how that affects our committee and allocations for Parks and Recreation.
Is that part of the permitting fees? Is that part of the permitting fee?
No.
No.
So the impact fees aren't paid at permitting?
I'll bring back an item with all the,
Collected.
yeah, I'll bring back an item with all, or I'll email you all that information so we're not speculating and trying to.
And how they're charged.
Yeah, my husband was a general contractor, so in my mind, the permitting, all that was collected.
I'll
with
get those
permitting.
answers and email them to you.
Okay, that's good, because we're inquiring minds and we want to know. It'd be good for us to understand.
Yeah. Rich, just a question about what do you have in mind for Riverview Park planning? Any thoughts on that?
Well, they're still in conceptual design, and I believe we'll be bringing a concept out for you guys probably early November.
Is that going to go to another public input meeting before it comes to us?
It won't go to an input meeting, but it'll go to a public, well, I guess it would be an input meeting.
Because I think when we had the last meeting, the company that they chose said they were going to take all of the suggestions and make a conceptual plan and then schedule another public meeting
For public input, correct.
And I think that happens before it comes to us.
Or very close, yeah.
It's really good, yeah. Well, they're not back with it, so we don't have the meeting.
Yeah, we don't have it back yet.
So that has to be, how many, for that public input meeting, what's the notice, 14-day notice?
Oh, I don't believe there's actually a required notice.
There's not a requirement?
I don't believe so, because there's no, it's just input on a conceptual plan.
Oh, okay.
I mean, we would give the public more than.
Well, when that gets scheduled, it seems like between meetings, there's not a good flow of information going back and forth. So I want to make sure that all the committee members have some heads up before that meeting, because most of us would like to be there. Any other questions from the committee on unfinished business? So we're going to move to item B, which is committee member park updates. Mr. Renzi, would you like to start?
Sure. My parks are good, Friendship Park. Riverview Park, I really would like to see the bushes trimmed where the car spaces are along the river. I think you could trim them down to maybe 6 feet and let people have a view. They're really overgrown now. There's no more, there's maybe 3 spots that you can see the river. Everything else is taken up by growth.
You're talking about the
Mangroves.
ones along the
mangroves.
That's
Yeah.
not going to happen.
We're very, 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 very limited in what we can do there.
But I was under the understanding that you could trim them down to 6 feet.
And that's not my understanding.
Maybe we should clear that up.
I believe we have it in the minutes from back in the summer when or maybe the late spring when we discussed this, and I'll dig those back out
And maybe the ones that aren't the mangroves can be
Well, Rich said they were all mangroves.
different types.
three
Yeah.
different types.
I agree, we've talked about this before, and I agree too. If we can get it cut,
Say
I
the-
thought it was 6 feet at least, but if you can get back to us on that, because I know people have asked too about that. It's really changed.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. You sit and look at a tree in front of you.
Ms. White?
I want to eat my McDonald's looking at the water, you know?
You need to walk off the burger, though.
Yeah.
We got a bunch of spaces a little bit further south
Well, if it's
Oh, no.
raining and.
that don't have any mangroves.
Easy Street Park, been walking that a lot, especially at night when it's cooler, and it really is nice with and they cut the grass today, the lights on the sidewalks. But I do know that there's a lot of grass, and I'm assuming it's because of summer and rain. There's a lot of grass in the water.
That just got treated maybe 2 weeks ago, and it does take a little bit of time.
Okay.
But we did treat it
Yeah.
for the, whatever is growing in there.
Okay.
The algae or whatever it is.
Yeah, because it's pretty thick. And our car slower downers, our ducks, I don't know, we have more baby ducks that have now, and they just sit in the road and cars will wait or they honk, but they really do slow down the traffic, I have to say.
I know, they've been
Better than,
there's like a hump there now.
well, it's better than having the speed bump or something, because cars will stop for them.
do.
And there's quite a few now, so everything else is fine there.
Ms. Webster? You don't have anything?
Mic on either.
You have
I don't have
anything in
anything
your
on.
parks?
Of course.
Good.
They're all good except for the pickleball courts. One of the windscreens is down on the parking lot side, and the windscreen on the west end is missing completely. Don't know if you're aware of that or not.
Mr. Halloran, do you have anything on your parks? Would you like to come up so you can be recorded?
I visited George Street just the other day and did some personal maintenance, just some pruning and weeding. There are also some curb bumpers that had gotten low in the grass, and so I was able to pry those up, and they look a little bit more presentable right now. But I haven't been over to Bryant. That'll be my next.
Okay.
All righty.
Okay.
Thanks.
I have Periwinkle Park, the Garden Club Park, and Filbert Park. I'm happy to say that Periwinkle Park is really getting more use. And in early morning, I go to the Garden Club Park, and there's a lot of folks that go there and just kind of sit down and watch the water. So I'm happy to see that these parks are getting more use, but I haven't found anything that is out of sorts in either of those parks at this point. So we're all in. Mr. Abrajo will have to figure out what he's doing with his parks at another time. All right, so item C, upcoming events at Riverview Park.
I don't want, unless you want me to, I won't go through each one of these individually since you can.
I think if everyone has looked at the agenda, do you have any questions on the upcoming events at Riverview Park?
The Halloween costume,
Yeah.
if we want to participate in that.
I do want to talk about that one, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So we need, if anybody wants to volunteer to judge, we'll have the standard categories, but then we'll also have the Pioneer Days category, and whoever wins that then will be featured at the December 8th Centennial event. So if you want, and you can tell me now, or you can email me, let me know whoever wants to volunteer to judge.
Who can go October 18th?
5 is kind of tough.
Mr. Renzi?
You wouldn't judge them right at 5, right?
No, it's not till 6:15.
It's not till 6:15.
Okay,
That's when
it
it
says 5
starts.
PM.
But that's when
Okay,
people start.
I could do it too.
Mr. Halloran, are you interested in judging that? It is
October 18th.
October 18th. It's a Friday evening. The event starts at 5 o'clock, but the going up on the stage and the different categories start at 6:15 for judging. Okay, Mr. Halloran will be going too.
Good. 1, 2.
I'm very pouty because I'm out of the country for that, and I love doing it. So much fun. So next time, please pass the date by me before I leave. I would really appreciate that.
And then I'd like to talk about the number 7, which is an exciting, for me, it's an exciting partnership we have with Orca. That day, that weekend is, and it's the same weekend as the Halloween event, they will be placing several hundred oyster pods right there off of Riverview Park. So they have 3 volunteer days. I will send you unless Ron has already done it, I'll send you the flyer for the volunteer in case you want to participate.
The one thing that I noticed about that, though, is you have to lift 50 pounds in and out of the water.
But that's only one element of that day. There's other things that you could do.
Oh, so there's other things you can
Yeah.
volunteer for there?
Yeah.
Okay.
Where are they putting those out?
You know where the kayak launch is?
On the park, yes, where
If
the
you go
green area?
off the shore there,
Yeah.
they're split 2 different ways, and they'll be marked so that kayakers and rowers won't run
Nice.
over them and all that kind of stuff.
Wow. Wear shoes.
Thank you.
And that's all I have for the events.
Does anyone on the committee have any questions about any items 1 through 9?
Yeah, I do.
Okay, sir.
What is community night? What does that entail?
That's, the police department does community night, and it, honestly, I'm not sure all of what it entails. It's kind of like a national night out event where they highlight the things that they do, that the police department is involved in.
Is that where they bring out and do the dogs and they have kids go into the police cars?
I believe so.
All right, so new business. We have our sunshine law training, so we're compliant with what we need to be doing here.
Advisory Board, let me introduce Jennifer Cockcroft, our city attorney, and she will guide you through this little refresher.
Okay,
Good evening.
thank you.
Nice to see you all. Nice to meet you. My name is Jennifer Cockcroft. I'm city attorney for Sebastian. I hopefully am a good resource to Richard on a day-to-day basis through these issues. And if you ever need anything, better, don't hesitate to contact and we'll figure it out. Okay? So briefly, as a citizen advisory board of the city of Sebastian, you get your jurisdiction basically through the city council. You're a limited jurisdiction board. Basically, you have a mission given by the city council. I'm sure most of you have heard this already, but you're established by section 2-211. We don't need to go through that yet, Richard. Get in ahead. So you know that your role is limited to only studying and providing recommendations to the city council as to park systems and active recreation programs and facilities. You're appointed by the council, 5 residents and 2 alternates. Part of that is selecting a chairman and a vice chairman on an annual basis, and there are some brief guidelines on that are provided by Robert's Rule of Order. Just a handy tip to think of when you're doing your elections is that you don't do it by a motion, you do a nomination. So that can get sticky, and at your annual election, if you'd like, I can be here to help you through it if there's any issues. So briefly, we'll start going through these laws and ethics. As an advisory board, you are subject to the Florida statutes. You have to follow the ethics guidelines and the public records aspects. of that. So I'll briefly give you this PowerPoint. You've probably seen it if you've watched City Council or any of the other advisory board meetings. The same rules basically apply to all the citizen advisory boards in Florida. There's a little bit of differentiation when you get into quasi-judicial bodies. If you all ended up serving on a planning board later on, some of these things might be helpful to you. So your authority is derived from Florida statutes, and there's a few different sections, and also the Florida Constitution, and then the city code, which I referenced. All of you would be subject to basically just knowing, what your guidelines are. Don't go beyond those generally. It's simple. It's those kindergarten rules. Do the right thing, no issues. So we have our code of ethics, we have our public records law, we have our city ethics that may come into apply. Generally, it's just going to follow the Florida statutes. Then I talked briefly about the quasi-judicial versus quasi-legislative. Legislative is basically when the council writes a law or you recommend approval of a new ordinance or a new policy. That's legislative. Quasi-judicial is when you have a hearing and you talk about different aspects and different points, positive and opposition. So briefly, the code of ethics. Why do we need it? We want our public advisory representatives to be fair and impartial. We don't want you to be influenced by improper bias, whether it be financial, personal, or other. We want you to be independent, impartial, and we don't want you to use your office for private gain. The reason for that is we want to make sure that we represent our citizens. And we appreciate your volunteerism because, it takes a village of volunteers to make things happen generally in a lot of variety of offices. So why should you be concerned? There are potential penalties, criminal, civil, or you could be removed from office. We've seen some of that in the news recently. We'll just try to avoid that. Stay on this side of, stay on the side of on right. You shouldn't, in that vein, no gifts. You shouldn't do business with your agency. You shouldn't take money for your vote, obviously. You shouldn't misuse your position or misrepresent it. Just because you're on the Parks Board doesn't make you an expert in parks. So when you act, if you go before another board, you can only do that when you're designated by the Parks Board to act as a whole. Basically, you shouldn't basically go to say you went to the Natural Resources Board and you said, my name is Vicki Dumheller, I'm sorry. I have a long last name too. And the Parks Board, we believe da-da-da-da-da-da. Unless the Parks Board gave you a report and said, go do that, that would be improper. Does that make sense? We wouldn't want you to misuse privileged information, but generally you're not going to have any. Only I'm generally going to have any of that, and then at a certain point that becomes public record too. Sometimes there's post-employment restrictions, which means we wouldn't want you to be lobbying the Parks Board to do a certain project after you leave the board, if it would become your financial benefit at that point. Dual office holding, generally not going to come into apply with a citizen advisory board, but just so you know, me as a charter officer, I can't be a charter officer somewhere else. That's what that means. A council member can be he could be a board member in certain instances, or she, but it's going to be the exception rather than the rule. Absenteeism from voting. If you're here and in the seat, you should be anticipating that you're going to vote on an item and not just abstain from it because you're not comfortable making that choice. You're here to represent the council and also the citizens at large. The only time you wouldn't vote on a measure is if it's financial gain to you, or you are, the project itself, you just can't be fair and impartial. You just can't do it, period. And then you would have to fill out the appropriate form. And there's a Florida statute on that. But that's going to be the exception rather than, I've seen it happen once, and I've been a city attorney for 20 years. So topics of ethical concern, required disclosures, gifts, honoraria. Honoraria is what's used, that's the term for if somebody gave you money to come speak. And there's different ethics advisory opinions on that, so I don't see that happening, but if it ever did, feel free to reach out to me or Richard. The financial disclosure forms, I'm not sure if you guys do it, but if you're required to do that, I'm sure Jeanette will get you that form and make sure it's done timely. So we don't accept gifts. If you do, make sure you report it so you don't get in trouble. Basically, the $25 is going to be the line there. Anything over $25, be wary of. And actually, I'd be wary of anything. If anybody tried to give you anything other than a tchotchke, you know, a little squeeze ball or something, a T-shirt, you know, to represent, you know, like, for example, Meals for Wills passed out cups one time at a council meeting. Such a small dollar, sort of a tchotchke. We don't worry about that. It's, you know, when you get big items, somebody gives you Disney tickets or something, and then you start getting into whether that's allowed or not. But we should never, ever, 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 ever take a gift to influence a vote. To influence a vote. To vote yes or no. And that's going to apply to staff too. So we should never, ever, 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 ever take a gift to approve a project or things of that nature. And then there's honoraria, talked about that. These are, you know, I gave you the statutory references here, and if any of you wants a copy of this PowerPoint, I can have Richard send it to you. This doesn't really change from year to year. It's kind of dry, I'm sorry. So conflict of interest would apply when the only time you would abstain from a vote would be if it's a direct economic benefit to your pocket. It's really not going to happen often, but if you ever had that instance, then we have a form for you to fill out, and we would make sure that that got turned in and kept on record for public record. So that statute that I talked about, if you were unable to make an impartial decision, that would only apply in a quasi-judicial matter. So like if you were on planning board or city council, and that statute is 286.012. So there is some potential confidential information that you shouldn't disclose, but generally 99.9% of the stuff that comes through before you is going to be public record. So not too much to really talk about on that. But going on to public record. So as we see here, going on to public record. There we go. I don't think I added this, so who's doing all this? So basically, any paper, email, text, document, anything made or received in connection with the transaction of public business. So if you two of you are talking about going to lunch or dinner after the meeting, that's not talking about public business. So long as you don't get to the restaurant and start talking about all the projects, because whenever you're making a decision or recommendation for a board, all the board members should have the same information when you're making that. When you do site visits or go out and check things out ahead of time, unless the board sent you out to do that, that's what we call an improper site visit. So that's why we disclose those things before a vote. You disclose your ex parte communications, and you disclose any site visits or conflicts. And that is designed so that when you make a decision on the board, you're making it in a proper manner and that everybody's informed of everything. Does that make sense? So all documents, so the only exception to that is if I jotted down a note and it was just transitory information, say you're up there just, you're like, I have a question about this, I'm just gonna jot it down. It's not like this whole diatribe or like a speech or anything. At that point, just transitory information, not public record, but if you have a whole prepared page that you're gonna talk about, then that would be public record. Does that make sense? So basically, scrap paper notes, not public record. Prepared documents, public record. It's a good way to think about it. But if you're ever in question about that, lean on the side of public record, because Florida has a very, very broad policy on protecting public record. So, but it's like I said on D, it does include notes taking during the meeting. So if you have any of those, you just leave them behind and we'll get them to Janet. Moving on to sunshine law. So like I just already talked about briefly, two or more members of the same board is when that kicks in. So if Joanne, Ms. Webster, is talking to Kelly Dixon about stuff, not the same board, not a sunshine violation. Now, if you're talking to Mr. Morrow about parks stuff, that might be a violation. But if you're talking to him about city council stuff, not a violation. So ever any questions, err on the side of caution, talk to us first. Just always be aware of the appearance of impropriety, because if somebody sees you together and knows that you're on the Parks Board together, then they may say, hey, that's not cool, you're not supposed to be doing that. You guys are supposed to only talk about board business at the board meeting. So, they could always make a complaint with the Ethics Commission. Yes, ma'am. And always turn the microphone on for Janet, or she will get you.
She's good at that, too.
So if I run into a city council member and we're talking and it's something that our park is going to be working on and we're just discussing that?
No, that's fine as long as you disclose it then it might be an ex parte communication for your board. If you're making a recommendation on that item after you've talked to them, then, so if before the meeting, if you're going to take a vote on something, and you've had an ex parte communication with somebody about that, and it might be influencing your recommendation, then yeah, that may be an ex parte communication that you should disclose. But it's not a sunshine violation, because it's not with your board.
Okay.
I've been on the board here 3 years,
Yes, sir.
and how come you're coming to us now with this?
Well,
No
I've
one has
only
ever
been-
said anything.
I've only been here a year, so.
Well, you should know something about why you're here.
I'm sorry?
You know something why you're here
City
talking to
Council
us
asked
now.
me, you're not being singled out. City Council asked me to do a refresher for all of the boards.
And I brought this up myself, that because we had new board members, that we should go through this because you forget about things and it's good that everybody gets refreshers on it. But I'm surprised we've done this before in 3 years, didn't we, when Brian?
No,
I thought we,
not like
the other
this.
city council
No.
members.
Well, I'm not sure.
I have been.
I'm not sure what the
before.
city attorneys did before me. I mean, different jurisdictions handle it different ways. I've represented 13 different municipalities, and sometimes we'll do it as a big group once a year, but you don't always get the one-on-one interaction that you would, and you don't really get to meet the, put names to faces and, things like that. And I think sometimes people aren't as comfortable asking questions in a large group. So that's why I'm here.
And when city council, let's say, is discussing use of a property, and I personally think I can go to city council as a person and
Yes, you
give my
can.
opinion on
Yes, you can.
on that.
I'll explain that a little bit more later, too.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. You don't.
So to be safe, as members of this board,
Right.
I would say, don't say, talk, think, or have anything to do with anyone outside this room,
No,
right?
no.
To be safe.
I mean,
But one of our,
No,
one
Generally-
question that I have is, outside of this board meeting, if we're thinking about some of the things that are going to come forward for discussion or that
Yeah.
we discussed at a meeting, and we'd like to get that information disseminated before our next meeting, we can go through Mr. Blankenship, correct?
yes, you just can't have correspondence back and forth. Say Richard sends out an email to you all with information, you should never reply all. That's a good strategy. When I send an email to city council to give them information on something, I always include at the bottom, as always, please do not reply all. Because then you're having conversations outside of the public eye, and that's what the state doesn't want.
So, but we can send an email to Richard and say, hey, I've been thinking about this, here's some information that I think might be valuable to send out to the committee before the next meeting, and he could send it out if he feels that way?
I wouldn't advise doing it ahead of the meeting. I'd advise him bringing it forward to you all together in a public setting. If it's urgent or something like that, but I think the best practice on that is for you to send it to him and to bring it forward to the board, to you all collectively. You can't always, you can't always count on people checking their email. Some people check their emails once a week, sometimes once a month. I know one of my council members, not naming names, only checks it, once a week, but, everybody has their, ways of dividing their time up. So I think the best way would be for him to bring it forward for all of you at the same time at the board meeting. So then you can discuss it. Now, if it's something you want him to research, send him an email, like the impact fee thing. Anything you can bring to him ahead of time that you want to discuss so that he can prepare it for you and bring it forward. And if there's a legal issue, he can come to me and we can sort it out. And then that way you've got the full information when you're talking about it. Make sense? But I don't want you to think this is so draconian, like Mr. Rental?
Renzi.
Mr. Renzi.
Renzi? Yeah. I'm not trying to make you scared to be up here and help out. I'm just saying, I just want to make you aware. So, we've seen what happened with some past city councils, and we don't want, anybody to run afoul. It's just, just here to give you the info. City Council did make some changes to some of the regulations and ordinances, and that's the other part of why I'm here. Some of the timeframes have changed and some of the rules with respect to alternates. But, so going back to sunshine law, we already kind of discussed this, but, so is it a meeting? Like I said, if you're going to dinner, you're having a social gathering, that's not an issue. The only time it becomes an issue if it's, we know that multiple members are going to be somewhere, then we'll just go ahead and post it just to be safe so that nobody can say, they violated sunshine. We're just here to try to protect you to the extent we can. So, moving on. Thank you. I didn't put those fancy things in there. Ex parte communications. Like I said, so if it's a written communication, somebody sends you an email or a letter about something, you need to just pass that on and it'll become a part of the record. That's not a big deal. Investigation site visits, usually they're presumed prejudicial, but you rectify that by disclosing it. So as long as you disclose your ex parte, like that means if you you went and looked at one of your parks. Basically, you told everybody that you did, and that's, if you made any decisions on that park, then you've already told them, yeah, I was out there.
I have a question.
Sure.
If I get a personal email from the public on something that we're going to be discussing, do I get back to them or do I send it?
It's always best to send it to staff, and then that way a public record's created of it, and you don't have to worry about the record keeping of it, because as an advisory board member, like I said, your emails, even if they're made on your personal email, can become public record. So it's best for you to just forward it on to Richard.
So I would just tell them, I'm going to forward this to Richard, and he will get back to you on that.
That's the best practice, I would say.
Okay.
Because that way the public record is recorded. The city has, our IT has us set up to archive the public records and the emails, and then that way you don't have to worry about it if a request would come in. So we do have public comment. We must allow those with contrary opinions to express them. Always best just to let people talk. Thank you, next, rather than getting into a back and forth. Public comment is not intended to have a discourse with the board. It's intended just to give information, let them talk, move along, and get the information, and then staff can follow up on it. And then if it requires bringing it back to the board, he will. That's what I advise for my board. That'll lead to the least amount of conflict and move your board meetings along. Because you've got other business to handle, right? So along those lines, quasi-judicial, we don't have quite as much power to limit public input, but generally they should be speaking under designated time periods, whether it's the applicant or the opposition. So when you make a board decision, you're making recommendations here, but what I want you to know is that if you make a decision, you generally need to make, this applies more so to planning board and boards that would make decisions in quasi-judicial matters. You have to make your decision based on what's in the code or the law. Your emotions should not play into it. The reason for that is that most of the time we're dealing with public property or personal property that's owned by people, and you could affect people's property rights. So a lot of times you may not understand what's going on at a city council meeting, if, you know, why something may get approved that you don't think should have. A lot of times we're constrained by the statutes and the code, and that's designed so that we don't unfairly, improperly affect somebody's property rights. And Florida has established a very strong interest in personal property rights. So if you're going against something, you must state and show justification for that, saying basically, well, I don't feel like they met this criteria, and here's why. And that's why I think it should not be approved. That would be the proper way to do that. So the other thing in our hearings is due process. Basically, we have to give somebody, if they want to be heard, then we have to give them an opportunity to be heard, and we also have to notice the meeting. So it's the three critical things in citizen advisory boards and council meetings is notice, opportunity to be heard, and a record. And Janet's keeping our record.
Is there a time limit that they can actually
So we did recently implement that, and I'll tell you about that in just a couple of minutes. I promise I'm going to wrap up here soon. We're going to skip over judicial. Quasi-judicial, like I said, is going to be notice, opportunity to be heard, unbiased decision maker. So basically no conflicts, no ex parte communications unless they're disclosed. Site visit, same thing. And then we want a fair hearing so that if it gets appealed and the record is made, that's our minutes. A lot of times we'll take sworn testimony only under oath, but recently we've started having speaker oath cards. So basically, rather than swearing in the whole room and making them state everything when they come up to the mic, fill out the card ahead of time. And that's designed, once we get into the practice, designed so that it flows a little bit better. We have the record. We don't have to, search it up later. We've got a good oath on that card, and it's got the name and address of who's speaking. And that's designed also because in quasi-judicial hearings, like I said, we're dealing with property rights, and it's always best to be, protective of those. Well, we have to be legally. So, and that's because if we get appealed, we don't want to lose or get sued and have to pay somebody else's attorney's fees. We're going to skip over quasi-legislative because you're a policy body and you're recommending, you're not making decisions necessarily on that. So then basically, if you have any questions, Richard and I are your resource. You can also reference these ethics statutes and the state constitution. We also have guidelines in our code of ordinances on your board. So now I'm going to move into a little bit more on parliamentary procedure and how you handle your board meetings. For our board meetings, we hope that each board will be careful when you're selecting your chair, and because we want your chair to have a good control of the room. Sometimes people don't necessarily understand that you're not just a board to hear their gripes, you're here to do business. And so we need a chair and a vice chair and people that can step up and keep good control of the meetings. Sometimes we have to control the room, essentially. And as the chairman, you have the unfettered ability and, not only the obligation, but the right to the control of the decorum of the room. And that includes removing somebody if you have to, if they're not following the rules of the chamber, essentially, if they're off topic, You can limit their public input. Public input, even though it's best to let them just talk, it still should be confined to Parks and Recreation Board matters, not, international world news or affairs. And you can legitimately and legally cut them off if that's what it goes into. So parliamentary procedure is our basic way of controlling meetings. We want a clear agenda put in advance. We want to prepare for our meeting if we can. We want to recognize our, other board members. There's ways to do that. Point of order. Meeting's getting out of control. You can always call point of order. Chair, take control and move along, make the decision and get the board meeting. You guys don't have a lot of that, but this is just good knowledge if you end up on another board or something too. Because we hope that if you leave this board, you'll help us on another. Sorry, I'm doing a lot of talking. Florida Statute 286-0114 does require public comment, but it has to be, it does only has to be a reasonable opportunity. It doesn't have to be unlimited, unfettered, and off topic. So that's why we have time limits. Recently, it became necessary to also implement time limits for applicants because sometimes our applicants can turn into more of a sales presentation than an application for development. So now applicants have, I believe, a 30-minute limit. Staff has, I think, a 20-minute limit. And all of that has been recently codified into our Code of Ordinances. So that's the other reason why I'm here. The third big change relates to alternates. Alternates should not be part of the discussion on the dais unless their presence is needed to meet the quorum or otherwise provided in your rules. So there were some other boards that had the alternates up on the dais and participating, and particularly with land development decisions and those that affect property owners' rights, we have to be very careful. And so alternates should no longer be on the dais. They're here as a citizen. They can comment on items. They can do all of those things, give you information as a citizen. But again, they should not be voting. You do have the requirements that council set and did not change on attendance, though, for alternates. They still should be here. But I think most often, if they didn't want to be here, then they could get an excused absence if need be, as long as you have the quorum. Council also did some changes with respect to Zoom, and I don't think you guys have that. Most places have gotten rid of Zoom after COVID. So I think council only allows now on quasi-judicial if it's the applicant, otherwise not on quasi-judicial. So I'm getting a lot off topic, but so those are the kind of changes too, that's the reason why I'm here. So not to sound negative, but just some of the hot topics not to do. Just because you're on a board doesn't mean you can take gifts from people. Just because you're on a board doesn't mean that you can take public money. Doesn't mean that you can give your kids jobs. That's the nepotism provision. Doesn't make you an expert. That's what I talked about earlier. If you go before another board as a member of this board, you should be going only if designated. Otherwise, you're a private citizen and you could talk as much as you want. The other thing is don't have secret meetings with your friends, meeting council members to talk about business. We don't do that, I'm sure. And then it doesn't mean you can hide your business, your emails, your texts, your social media even. If it relates to city business, it could be public record. Make sense? So once you if you have a social media account, Facebook, Instagram, whatever, if you're talking about public business all the time, your account could possibly become public record. And there was a Supreme Court case on that recently. So it's okay to comment and stuff, but you should never represent yourself as, I'm the Parks and Recreation Board member, and that's not what happened, and da-da-da-da-da. Like, you should maybe just tell Richard about it, and then he can look into it. So, does that make sense? And with that, I think my voice is about done. Any questions?
Yeah, where are these people offering money?
I know, right?
And
I
gifts,
know,
because
I know,
I haven't
I
never
know.
met one.
It happens. Look at Google, just Google some hot, recent happenings in other cities, not too far from here. You know?
I don't know, I don't have a lot of letters with checks in it, do you?
And if we did, we're not.
Geez, no, I can't take that diamond bracelet or big check.
Darn.
Yeah, I know. I know. People have a largely negative view of governments, and unfortunately, and so that's why we have these things.
So I do have one question, because
Sure.
I do make comments on social media, like I post our agenda.
Not a problem.
And just say, and if there's comments and people say, I don't like something about that park, or I can't get to that meeting, I will make a comment to just say, you're welcome to send me information, and I will bring it to the meeting with me to discuss. Is that not permissible?
I wouldn't engage in too much back and forth. I mean, you just could say, feel free to come to our meeting, here's the date. And if, here's my email if you wanted to put that out there. But
I
don't know
usually
if you
send
want
them
to.
Paul, Richard's email.
I think that's the best thing to do, is when in doubt, send it to Richard,
Yeah.
because that's what he gets paid for. So, yeah, he is, all of mine.
Well, he is, I'm sure.
I send him all mine. So, all right, with that, pleasure to meet you all. I'm sure I'll see you in the future.
Jen.
And if you have any follow-up questions, Richard and I will be happy to help you.
Thank you very much for the information.
You're very
presentation.
welcome.
Okay. All right, under new business, item B, our Florida Recreation Development Assistance Program grant.
Yes, ma'am. This is seeking approval of the advisory board to apply for a Florida Recreation Development Assistance Program grant to replace the playground here at Friendship Park. The last meeting, we came to you with two similar requests, but again, Bryant Park is going to be funded a different way, so I didn't want to waste the grant opportunity, so I'm asking tonight for your approval to go forth with the FERDAP grant for Friendship Park.
Do we have to make a motion for that?
I would like that to be.
I would like to make a motion that we accept this, that we recommend that you apply for the Florida Recreation Development Assistant Program grant for Friendship Park
I
Playground.
have a question. Is this a matching grant, or it's just a
No
straight?
match. No
No
match.
match.
All right.
Do I have a second?
I second it.
Any
Do I
discussion?
have a second from Mr. Renzi? All those in favor?
Wait,
Public.
input.
I'm sorry?
Public.
Oh, I'm sorry. Any public input on this? Zoom, public input?
Nobody's raised their hand.
Thank you so much. Okay, so we have consensus here that we approve that motion.
Did you call the vote?
Vote?
Pardon me?
Did you call the vote? I'm sorry. So public input and then vote. Okay.
Call
all
a
right.
vote.
You want us to vote again?
No.
All right, so the other new business item is, when we talk about the October meeting is canceled because of early voting?
Correct. So there will not be a meeting in October. So the next time we meet will be November 18th.
November 18?
When does early voting start?
Does anyone have any more
Next week, I
comments for the good of this advisory board? Okay, we are meeting adjourned.